Justin has requested me on Patreon to review Scream 3, which is of course the third entry in the series and originally intended to be the final movie at the time. But of course, horror franchises never truly end, and Ghostface continues to haunt to this day. This is probably the most divisive movie in the series, but I think it has enough decent qualities, and I have enjoyed Scream 3 whenever I return to it. For example, I like the decision to set the movie in Hollywood, which does make sense thematically. After all, Scream is about characters being knowledgeable about horror movie conventions and whether they have an influence on actual psychopaths, so it makes sense to go right to the source. That was not the original plan when Kevin Williamson provided his initial story treatment for the third film, as the story would have continued to take place in Woodsboro. However, that was scrapped after Williamson became involved in other projects, and Wes Craven and new screenwriter Aaron Kruger decided to move the story to Hollywood. It also makes sense for the progression of the series to go from high school to college to bigger places. Of course, another major reason for this was that the Columbine shooting made the filmmakers and producers wary about showing someone going around and killing people in a small town, including the high school, although at one point Craven was asked to remove the violence entirely, which he put his foot down on. While the other movies go into whether the images on screen have an effect on real-life violence, Scream 3 digs into some of the people behind the scenes and the seedier aspects of the film industry, with references to casting couches and producers and executives looking to take advantage of their positions in power. This becomes a critique on how women are treated in Hollywood. It's particularly interesting looking at the movie now as the predatory actions of producers, directors, actors, and others have become a lot more open and well-known. Harvey Weinstein is probably the most famous case, and he just happened to be one of the executive producers of Scream 3. I wonder if he read the script critiquing the behavior of executives like him, and did that Garfield meme. Because there are several similarities between Weinstein and John Milton, the producer of the in-universe Stab movies. Milton even excuses his behavior towards women, stating it was the 70s and it was a different time. Weinstein would say pretty much the same thing after the stories came out about him. You definitely see a lot of Wes Craven's own anger coming out in this movie with elements like that, and lines like one actress complaining about there being new script rewrites every day, which was also a common occurrence during production of Scream 3. Regarding Sidney Prescott, I like what they do with her character here, as she chooses to isolate herself away from society. It's understandable why, after the events of the previous two films, she would decide to just get away from it all and make sure anyone donning the Ghostface costume and calling her on that phone cannot track her down. It thus becomes scary when she is found, forcing her to go to Hollywood. Craven retains the tension in several moments as we wonder when Ghostface is going to pop out, with a particular highlight coming from a scene where Sidney walks through a recreation of her house at the film set. That was a clever way to call back to the first movie and highlight the art imitating life aspect of the sequel. I also like that Scream 3 functions like a whodunit, with Gale, Dewey, and other characters trying to figure out who the killer is this time. A lot of the movie is following them around as they solve this mystery, with Parker Posey also tagging along, although the movie's use of a red herring is having characters act very suspicious and speak in a kind of menacing tone. Emily Mortimer's character does that a few times, as does Patrick Dempsey as a detective on the case. They never act like that in the rest of the film, so it feels like the movie just does that to make us suspect them as the possible killer. Speaking of Dempsey, I've long found it disappointing his character never came back for the future films, as I liked him, but apparently scheduling conflicts are the main reason he has not returned yet. With its setting, Scream 3 throws in a few fun cameos too. Carrie Fisher appears as the studio employee who is pointed out looks exactly like Fisher. She even wrote her own dialogue for the scene, and next to Princess Leia, this was actually one of the roles I thought of when she passed away. She does a lot with this small role. Also smile at Jane Silent Bob popping up, even though you see a poster and VHS of Clerks in the first Scream movie. And then in Jane Silent Bob Strike Back, the two of them run through the middle of filming on a new Scream sequel, complete with a cameo by Wes Craven. It's best just to think of it as two filmmakers with respect for each other, putting them in their movies, rather than trying to figure out how it fits logically within the universe. Once the Ghostface reveal happens, it does feel like they stretch it out. The other movies have the big reveal, there's a speech explaining the motivations, a fight, and then it's over. The filmmakers understood that once the killer was unmasked, the audience knew it was the climax and were quick to send them on their way. But this final confrontation goes on for a while and could have been tightened up just a tad. In fact, the ending was originally shorter, but since this was meant to be the final film, the feeling was that the audience needed to get a bigger bang for that buck. So the ending was refilmed, and at the very last minute too. Overall, despite being considered the black sheep of the franchise, I do like Scream 3, and find there's more under the surface than it's normally given credit for. Now let me know in the comments what you think of the movie, and thanks for the request, Justin.